Hi, everybody. What a great honor to be here. I'm really privileged to be here with you today. I've been in this center for 3 days. I had seen Janine's center 20 years ago. And if you have a chance to look around, you'll notice that the design is very intentional. And it's designed so that youngsters can learn, can receive information, but instantly apply it. It's amazing to watch. They have chickens, if you didn't know that. They have flower gardens. I took a melon home yesterday. It was really amazing. But I've known Janine for 20 years, and her passion, her courage is just, it always inspired me. When I was here 20 years ago, she had me in a car for 3 days, and we traveled around, and I was just worn out. And she took me in front of one group, I can't remember what it was, and we overheard a guy who was the chair of this group say, oh, there's some hoop-a-wah-wah coming in today, And so I heard that, and I said, I've got some work to do, because they didn't seem too excited to see me. So, listening here this morning to hear John Roth speak and to hear Drew speak, that blew me away. It really taught me how people who have certain experiences in life can articulate the impact of those experiences on their heart, on their emotions. And you'll see how many children I've crossed paths with as we go through this. But I just have to say, I was really inspired this morning. And, I'm really fortunate and inspired to be working with Cindy Lane. If you hang around Cindy, there's this quiet wisdom. You'll notice she's always thinking. She's doing that. She is taking information in, and I can just see it. She's really weaving it together, integrating the information, if she thinks it's important, with what she already knows. Her passion is amazing if you hang around with her. She knows what she's doing. Just an overwhelming intellect. And so I've really enjoyed working with her. So my job today, I shouldn't call it a job because it's fun, is to try to help explain, when you talk about this science of reading stuff, what in the world does that mean? And how can it help kids? And why does it help kids if we can provide those who teach teachers and teachers with the information? It's not witchcraft, it's just hard work, objective science. And, my years of, as you probably know, I was at the NIH. I directed a lot of programs at the NIH, and I was at the White House for a while as I served as an advisor to the president. And I testified, as noted before, that I testified in front of Congress many, many times. And, that was tremendous responsibility. I was scared most of the time. And we worked very, very hard. And over the years, I got tired. Change is not for sissies. Trying to persuade people to change is the wrong way to go. I thought the science that we were accruing would speak for itself, and teachers would go, okay. And faculty members at higher ed institutions would go, oh, right. But we didn't explain it well enough. And we also didn't involve teachers and leaders at the state level, at the district level, we didn't involve them in how we were trying to put all this together. That was a big mistake. If I'd have had, for example, Randy with me, and I would be showing or asking his advice about, am I getting this right? Am I asking the right questions? I would have learned a lot. If I'd have had teachers with us actually involved in the planning of the studies and telling me where we're off the mark, we'd have done a lot better job. And what I've learned over the last 30, 40 years is that this is all about relationships. It's about me being able to work with you and to explain things, but to listen more than me quack away. And so my job is to kind of make common sense of all this research. What people don't know is as I was doing my more basic research and I was working with kids who could not read, I didn't have any idea what it was like for them. It was a very sterile kind of, and I didn't know how the teachers were teaching. I didn't know what their pressures were. So I went and took my College of Ed courses, and I became a third grade teacher. And then I became a special educator, 1 year each. Miserable at both. Really, I had no idea what I was doing. And, as the Texans say, bless their heart, my college professors would, doing the best they could, were trained themselves in ways of teaching reading and conceptualizing reading that may have missed the mark. None of us knew that. But when I applied some of that theoretical work and some of the instructional strategies that flowed from that theoretical work, I didn't get anywhere with a lot of kids, particularly if they were struggling. And kids that struggle the most are those, well, there's, as you watched in your walk around, you look at the data, and the data is just the data. That's what it is. Is it accurate? Yeah, it's accurate, and I'll show you how we know that. But the data represents a face of a child, a human being. And a lot of times we don't keep that in mind because people argue about, well, that's not valid for our school or our state or whatever. But as I'll show you, the data are accurate. And I learned as a teacher and teaching kids, that's the wrong word, and trying to teach kids that I can see their face when I look at the data. So people have asked me while I'm here today, how does Kansas fare with the other states I've worked with, Mississippi and Kelly Butler and that group, and other states that have been at this for a while, made a lot of mistakes, but they certainly figured that out. And people, to some degree, I don't know if we'll ever figure it out, but in all cases, when we haven't done the job we've wanted, when we have this moonshot, when we have this extraordinarily complex set of objectives in front of us, it does take certain kinds of shifts in our thinking. It does. We won't go anywhere if we don't be open-minded. And so here are the questions I ask when people say, well, can we change this? Well, we can, but only under certain conditions. And can we rely on replicated scientific findings? Can we, take the evidence in and it can be sometimes scary. And people point fingers all the time. You ever notice that? You know, people hammer teachers. People hammer commissioners of education. It's ridiculous because it's so complicated, and the change is complicated, but it's within our capacity. It is, because we have seen it work in some other places, and I've certainly seen it with kids. But can we trust the science? And you know, trusting the science means you have to feel comfortable with it, and I'm going to try to explain what it really is. And can we master a common language? That's one of the things you'll hear me say several times today. When we use words like phonemic awareness, you know, people have all kind of different impressions of what that may be. I'll try to explain it today so it makes common sense. That you were there last night, I'm repeating myself, but I was giving a talk to educators, this is many years ago, and I was talking them through what phonemic awareness was, and hopefully I made sense, but apparently not to one principal who came up and said, Reid, you know, I'd like to know more about these pheromones. So, you know, that, but what was great is he wanted to know more. I didn't care what he called. So a common language is critical, and so what I'm going to try to share with you today are some terms you'll hear a lot about, but we may have different vocabulary for. You know, my dream has always been if we can build a common language with a robust knowledge base that people can trust, then if I'm a teacher and I'm working with a youngster who's struggling, I can ask another teacher to come over and watch, and we can say, I can say, do you think the Phonemic Awareness Foundation is good enough? And she may say, it seems to be. I can see that he can rhyme, he can do these other kind of things. You might want to look actually at fluency. His fluency is really slow and labored. And also take a look at his vocabulary, because it's hard to read quickly when you don't know the meanings of the words. And it's very hard to read quickly when you don't pull the words off the page quickly and accurately. And these have all kind of labels to them, but I'll take you through that. And here's one that I've been bedeviled with for many years. Do we have the patience for transformation? And this is transformation, it's not improvement. You know, I was always taught in my scientific training, people use a phrase for it now, which is thinking according to first principles. You know, when you're solving a problem, we can look at analogies, or we can look at other systems that have changed and see how we can improve using some of their kinds of features. But when I started this research, after I taught children, and after I saw the failure that I brought to bear, I said, you know, this is ridiculous. Actually, I didn't know how kids learn to read. I had no idea. I knew that when we were looking at young readers, middle school readers, high schoolers, adults, I knew when they were reading, when I'm imaging their brain, I can see the systems involved. And they're very reliable systems. And I could see if we had readers coming in that struggled, I could see differences in those signatures for sure. But I didn't know what goes into that. Why was that? I didn't know how they could read. I didn't know what went wrong when they couldn't read, what was getting in the way. And I'll go through this in a bit more detail. kind of saw working with, and I'll just presage it, over the years, 34,000 kids. I haven't met all of them, but I've worked with quite a few of them because I've looked at their brains. 34,000. And they taught me more than any of my training have ever taught me. And as was mentioned this morning, a lot of those kids did not make it in life, meaning, they came into school raring to go, and by the end of the year, if they were struggling in the most critical subject area or task that was in front of them, in a year's time, they're destroyed. How do I know that? Because many of these 34,000 kids, we began to study them at 5 and followed them 3 times a year for an average of 9 years. Those are called longitudinal studies. And we have still followed quite a few who are now, do the math, from 1985 until now. We still see them 3 times a year. So when I talk about the downstream tragedy of reading failure, it's not some abstract, kind of notion for me. It's looking in the faces of all these children I've worked with, or my teams have worked with. 34,000 kids. We also looked at a lot of readers that really had it together. You'll notice that some kids come into the first grade, boom, they can read. Or they certainly pick it up quickly. Quite a few kids can do that, and people say, well, that's because they've been taught by a certain method. Well, what they've been taught by are their parents primarily. The interactions during early childhood. We used to, there was an idea that, I'll go over this in a minute, that reading is a natural kind of skill. You develop it naturally, was the idea, just like we begin to speak and listen without direct instruction. And people had thought, wait a minute, so reading is also natural because it's part of language. But it's not. It's not at all. Doesn't have a genetic load to it. And so what was going on in these young kids' homes? Well, they had a lot of books in the home. They read all kind of books to the kid in the womb sometime. Some people pumped Mozart in there. They played language games with their parents. They rhymed. They did silly kind of, syllable games. Parents may have not known they were doing this stuff, but the things you do with little kids as a parent are things that we ask early childhood educators to pay attention to when the kids themselves don't have the luxury of coming from some degree of economic foundation. That's why you see on the slides out there, when you disaggregate the data and you look at minority youngsters or poor youngsters, they didn't have these early interactions with language, So, anyway, a big one. Do we have the resilience to stay the course? Because we're going to come across some bumps, false starts. This is very, very human-driven complexity. We have to ask ourselves this: are we in for the long haul? Now, I use the moonshot idea because how long did it take people to even conceptualize how you build the rocket and to conceptualize how one can develop the navigational systems and so forth and so on to actually get to a moon? Well, they couldn't do it unless they worked together. Anybody ever seen Apollo 13? Do you remember the scenes where Ed Harris is Capcom? He's the guy in there, and there's all kind of people sitting in the chairs below him, and, a problem is here, and he says, telemetry, how are we doing? And he gets a report from a person down there. Thruster, how are we doing? Oxygen, how are we doing? And all of these people, yes, have their own specialties, but they have a common language. They can communicate. They're collaborating, although they're sitting in individual desks. And another big one that I've learned over the years is, we're going to hit up against silos. And we're going to hit up against turf. Somebody mentioned that this morning. I don't know if it was you or John, yeah. And that's a real reality. And at the basis of all that, from knowing my own struggle with seeing data or hearing new things that went against my research, fear comes in. Fear, did I do the wrong thing? Why didn't I get the right answer? Where did I mess up? Did I hurt anybody? When you're a scientist, the job always is to falsify the hypothesis. That means that you're not trying to prove something. You're trying to disprove something. And when you disprove it, that hurts. And that's because my ego is in it. I wasn't objective as a scientist. I let my ego drive it. And I let my fear drive it. And, after a while, I got over that. But it does hit us when we're in new territory. And this is what the next sentence says. Can we park our egos in long-term storage and design, lead, and teach with open minds? Culture change, I'll say this a couple of times, looks upward. When people are trying to go through these enormous changes in belief systems, taking me for an example, I would look up and see if my leadership was also changing and was directing change. And if they weren't, I'm getting pretty discouraged. I'm getting pretty pessimistic. And do we really understand why we must take on these responsibilities that Cindy has been talking about, that John talked about this morning, that Drew talked about this morning? Do we really understand why we're doing this? Are we just trying to change for change purposes? So or not, and you'll see why. But what I learned as a teacher was I did not know what I did not know. So I had no language to really say, well, maybe it's this way. Maybe it's this way. I did not know what I did not know. So my job is, has been for many, many years to try to help people develop background knowledge so that there's a common language and they can feel, I know this, and I can help people with this. So if I look at my work, I made some contributions as a neuroscientist, as a classroom teacher. Yes, I did. Test scores showed me I did, and I said, those test scores are BS. As a special educator, because I was working with kids with severe reading difficulties, but one-on-one, I was a little better, but still clueless. Because my training, my preparation, had different ideas that weren't informed by science, informed more by belief, philosophy, those kinds of things. So here's where I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know different instructional methods or strategies. I didn't understand what were the best curricula that had some evidence to them. I didn't understand how to assess kids over time, right there in front of me, to assess them as they were reading. We call it progress monitoring or continuous performance-based measurement. And so I didn't know how to do that. And I didn't know how kids learn to read. What the heck do they need to know? And I had no idea how to use the data that I wasn't collecting to differentiate instruction. You know, I didn't know what I didn't know. I guess I need to repeat that. And I denied the validity of the test scores. I made all kinds of excuses for the test scores. I blamed people for it. So my preparation was a lot of theory, but no instructional skill application. You know, we know now that as we're preparing teachers or physicians, I've been a professor in neurology for some years. Physicians have to memorize a lot, but they're immediately applying. So are speech and language pathologists. And we have models of preparation that have produced good outcomes with people knowing what they know. Education has been doing a great job in many areas, but the knowledge to application relationship sometimes isn't there. So teachers or would-be teachers in their preparation programs are hearing a lot of things, some accurate, maybe some not accurate, but they don't take it immediately and practice what they're learning with children. So it doesn't stick very well, and it, well, we know that story. So when people look at test scores and they see the bar graphs, and sometimes it's shocking, it's embarrassing, it's overwhelming. You know, people will say, well, that's not my school. And the thing is, when you look at test scores, all their numbers, their data, are they accurate? Yes. But each of those data points put a face to it. Each of those data points is a human being that, as you've heard this morning, people talk about how their lives were massively changed from a spirit point of view, from an emotional point of view, from a health point of view. So, as I looked at many, many children over my career, a lot of these children came to us.
Blake's is saw g o a d so glad. Blake is so glad. It at oh, last he has net is net his mom. It is
Blake is so glad. At last, he is 10. You're good.
10.
And the next sentence is his. You were right.
His mom has made him a.
So I try to keep that in mind. This child was taught through what we call balanced literacy or cueing systems. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. But when kids struggle to learn to read, you have to have more clarity. You have to have more directness, more intention to what you're teaching. And as hard as teachers work using some of these teaching philosophies and methodologies, we have to step back and ask, are their assumptions actually correct? What kind of science can we do to determine whether these different philosophies are actually based upon solid ground? You know, there's a couple of kind of, when you look at readers having a tough time, we have dyslexia. It does have a neurobiological base, I'll show you that. But we have kids that have reading difficulties that are iatrogenic, meaning the system caused them. Now that's a tough nut to swallow, but instructional disorders, that is not receiving the appropriate instruction as the kids are coming up, doesn't get to this. And so it's not just this youngster, Austin, is having a tough time learning to read. It's the fact that when he got to here, he was devastated. His spirit was gone. He hated school. His parents were just overwhelmed with grief. See, people don't understand what that does to a heart. And there's a lot of this going on. When you look out there at those graphs, take somebody into a classroom if they're doubting the data and link the piece of data with the human being. This is not abstract. So over my career, I've asked congressional members to go into a classroom because I can quack away with them during my testimony, but I ask them to come work with some kids, and some do. Some don't. They don't want anything to do with going in a classroom. They don't want anything to do with seeing the kids that are struggling. That's okay. But some do, and they see this, and it gives them a different perspective. I would like you to take a look.
Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they just didn't hold with such nonsense.
You know, if people kind of get roiled up in this versus that, this instruction versus this instruction, that's okay. It's right there in front of you. And this happens millions of times when we apply the right instruction. It's no figment of one's imagination. I can show you thousands of these kind of before and after kinds of things. Now, a lot of kids who can't read or score well on tests don't have kind of the decoding, phonemic issues you see here. Some of them can pull words off a page very quickly, but they don't comprehend well. But we understand why that is, and I'll talk about that. So let's start with the science of reading. This is, I actually was the first person, I hate to say this, but I coined the term scientifically based reading research in 1995. And the reason I coined that term is because we had enough evidence that long ago to say that if we use principles that are founded on the science, then we're going to get somewhere. So that's what I wove into the Reading Excellence Act. Scientists aren't supposed to write legislation. But if a president says, write the legislation, you know, I don't hang around and say no. And I worked with a gentleman, Robert Sweet, who did all the heavy lifting. I just got to tag along. scientifically based reading research was the foundation of the Reading Excellence Act and Reading First. Now, we get a lot of lousy information. Whenever sometimes I mention science of reading, and I don't explain it well, the media sometimes takes a little snippet and runs with it. Sometimes professors trained in a different way are not happy with it. Some leaders have not been provided what the language means. And all of these kind of groups still rely on phonics versus balanced literacy. I mean, I've torn my hair out. I'll be talking, or someone in the media will say, well, how do kids learn to read? And I should say, well, it's really an integrated process. You got to know the sounds in the language. You got to be able to understand that those sounds map onto these graphic characters. And you got to do that quickly, fluently. Elsewise, you'll bog down, not know what the heck you read. And if you want to understand what you read, you've got to have good vocabulary. You ever read, like I could read astrophysics all day long and I could pull the print off the page, but don't test me on it. I don't have the vocabulary. And when I'm reading, am I just passive or do I apply some intention, some strategies? What's coming next in this story? Does this relate to my life? The kinds of very intentional strategies we use to help kids understand more. Good teachers have known this for years. But phonics versus balanced literacy, of course, is the angry debate. And guess who loves angry debates? The media. When I testified in front of Congress, happened many times, I would be trying to help them understand that the ability to read is founded on an interaction of very critical skills. Those skills you hear in the science of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. And there's a heck of a lot more, but those seem to be palatable to some people. I would testify, and one of the members would say, so phonics works. I said, well, it's necessary, but it in no way is sufficient. Why is it hard for people to get their hands around that? I'm going to use my childhood language. I was going to say ain't, and my wife is going to kill me. It isn't either or. Teachers love when we help explain that they don't even have to argue phonics' whole language, because it's, number one, it's kind of stupid, actually, because it doesn't capture the complexity of what teachers do every day. But if teachers don't have the picture that it is a multivariate process in learning to read, and there are ways to teach each of the components of that, sometime in isolation, sometimes integrated, it's a tough road. So we set our teachers up for failure by arguing these philosophical things. Phonics versus whole language. Sometimes it's political. I notice that, a certain party, whatever it is, loves phonics for some reason. I never have figured it out. And then, other politicians say, well, just let the teachers do what they do. They come from the heart. This is their passion. That's all true. But it's simply not sufficient. So when we're talking about the science of reading, we're talking about a lot of information that that bears on 4 questions. And these are 4 questions that I came up with when I saw how I didn't know what I was doing as a teacher. How do children learn to read? What are the skills, the abilities, the neurobiological foundation, the social and cultural influences, the economic influence? How do they learn to read? We had to ask every question about what goes into that, because kids learn to read, yeah, their brains have to work hard. Kids learn to read, yeah, because the teachers are very adept at what they do. Kids learn to read better when they have home environments from day one that support language development. Kids learn to read because reading well begets confidence. Reading well begets self-concept. So how do kids learn to read? This is what I've spent 30 years doing. Why do these kids have difficulties? You know, which of these kids have not been taught some of the componential skills? Which of these kids come from environments where, whereas middle class, upper class kids learn 8 new words a day, or a week, 8 new words a week. Kids from disadvantage, on average, learn 8 new words a year. So, if one doesn't take into account that starting early is critical, you will note in the data that you walked out there, when you disaggregate that data, you see the disparities. Well, how in the world is somebody going to be proficient in reading when they are so far behind in the fundamental oral language skills they need? So the thing about doing science is all my students over the years in higher ed, the first thing we teach them is to falsify. We also teach them that science is democratic. The thing in science is it's competitive. People have ideas, they test those ideas, they come up with answers. People say, I don't like those answers, or the design was off, or whatever. They compete. And the great thing about science is we have to have the courage to allow our ideas to be overturned. It's democratic. I don't mean that politically. Science is open to change. It has to be. And that's why you try to falsify the hypothesis. Part of our common language. It's based on an awful lot of research. And this is the kind of term, if you think about it, that says, there are what kids need to know, but how do you impart what they need to know to them? And the one constant finding that we have a tremendous amount of replicated data on is that when you're presenting information, in reading information, whether it's teaching phonemic awareness, phonics, or whatever, it has to be direct. It has to be clear. It has to be systematic. It has to be explicit. I don't know if any of you all had any problem in any subject area. My problem was always geometry. Or some people say algebra. And, why? Because teachers taught me and glossed over a lot. I needed very strong clarity. And kids who are struggling in learning to read are no different. They have to have clarity. And I won't bore you with this, but structured literacy basically says, what is it? How do we do it? And who do we do it with? And all of those little bars are just small portraits of all of the competential skills kids need. Janine asked for me to come over and meet you all, and we were on the road. My wife and I are on the road. We drive in that Sprinter out there. And I'll tell you, if you ever want to know if your marriage is any good, put yourself in a Sprinter for 5 months. So we've survived. So people have a hard time with teaching teachers about direct instruction. It carries with it this terrible reputation that you're taking away the rights of the teacher, you're taking away the rights of the student, and you're drilling and killing this kid. Ever heard that? The fact of the matter is, how do we explain these kinds of things to get over that hump? What I know is the youngster that you saw having an extremely difficult time and then reading 2 years later was taught directly, systematically, explicitly. Systematically. And what does that mean? Is that drill and kill? No. Because it's always accompanied by rich kinds of literature availability. We love to see and always try to put in place chairs where kids can curl up in that chair and read. They can expand their minds by reading at young ages with their teachers. That really gives them the why they're doing this. It's really interesting. It's really fun. And so try to keep that in mind. The evidence that supports direct systematic teaching is more evidence than we have almost on any other behavioral finding. It's that strong. So, where do we get in trouble? Why the arguments about this phonics, whole language kinds of stuff? What in the world is going on? Teachers for years doing the best they can, having the open minds they have when they're in their preparation courses, have been taught, as I mentioned earlier, frequently, that reading is natural. Okay. Keep that in mind. I just want to show you I'm talking from a set of data that comes from 44 research sites, 48,000 children and adults studied, proficient readers, 22,000, at-risk struggling readers, 26,000, average number of years followed. Longitudinal span to date is 24 years, but that was back a while. Number of prevention intervention trials, 12. Schools currently participating, 266, and so forth. All right, so you've heard me say this. The questions I asked myself when I couldn't teach is, how do children learn to read? What goes wrong when they don't? How do you prevent it? How do you remediate it? So here are the sites that you see, all with teams of scientists, each team made up of educators, special educators, speech and language pathologists, physiological psychologists, neuroscientists, geneticists, sociologists. Each team is multifaceted, integrated. You ever try to get academics working together? Anybody ever tried that? If you go on a college campus where I used to work at Northwestern University, I would hear people griping all the time at each other. And Henry Kissinger one time said something made sense to me. He said, people love in higher education to just get mean and get nasty with each other, particularly in the faculty senate. And it's because so little is at stake. Now, that's not, I took that somewhat with anger, but you got to look at it. So you see all these sites, they're all multidisciplinary. They all have tremendous talent in each, and they try to figure out how do kids learn to read, why you can't, how do you prevent it, and how do you remediate it? Each site asking those same 4 questions. So here's where we get into the specifics. How do kids learn to read? Phonological and phonemic awareness. All right, let me just, don't fixate on the slide. I'll talk you through it. The words we hear coming by our ear are composed of sounds embedded in the speech stream. Here's the deal. We never hear the sounds when we're speaking. They are embedded in our running speech. The kids never hear the sounds. Some kids from homes that really practice these kinds of fun games, rhyming, uppy-dubby, those kinds of things, just regular kid games using language, somehow their brain begins to form circuits which can tear apart the sounds that are hidden in the language. But, most naive, when I mean naive, they hadn't been exposed, is what I mean by naive. You and I don't hear the sounds coming in the words by our ear. And that may not be a big deal, but those teeny sounds are what have to map onto letters. That's called the alphabetic principle. In other words, kids have to know there's an internal set of sounds that they can pull out when they're reading, so they see a particular letter shape and they slap the appropriate sound on top of it. That's phonemic awareness. Understanding that the words we hear are composed of smaller constituent sounds, and the brain can pull those apart. How does the brain pull them apart? By teaching activities that are direct and systematic, because there's no clarity there. You can't hear the sounds. You'll play with me, okay? Give me a word that rhymes with big. Pig. Good girl. How did she do it? How do you do that when she can't hear the sounds? How can she slice off a sound when she can't hear them? She had to slice, I said big, she had to slice off the b and replace it with a p, when the brain really doesn't hear those sounds orally. But she's had practice in doing kinds of things where she splits words up. That's phonemic awareness. The ability to understand that the words you hear are, hidden. And you have to teach it directly for kids who don't have the experience or they're dyslexic. Dyslexic youngsters come into this world with some difficulties in particular areas of the brain. Can they be taught? Yes. Takes longer. Takes a lot longer. And just as a piece of general information, the more severe difficulties the kids are showing us, the more intense the instruction has to be and the longer it has to be. Some children require 4 hours a day. Now that's a challenge, because who wants to spend 4 hours a day on something you don't do well? So this is where master teachers come in. This is where coaches come in, so that they can help people create the environment where 4 hours a day, is not a bad thing. So when you see these slow and labored kids, when you saw Austin, he wasn't able initially to understand that the words that are written on the page have individual sounds inside of them. That's why he was not applying the sounds to the letters. Very labored, halting, hesitant. That's why. And so as the teachers here worked with Austin, they began to represent what those sounds were. They use all kind of manipulatives. They show the kids. A lot of you all know how to do that. So then you see them 2 years later. The sounds are placed upon the letters quickly, almost unconsciously, and the kid is reading the words quickly. So how in the world can you comprehend, understand what you're reading, which is the goal of reading, if you're so slow and labored? I don't know about you, but if I'm reading like that, I don't remember when I get to the end of the story. I don't comprehend. That's why the NAEP scores suck. Excuse the scientific term. Because it's more of a comprehension test, which it should be. It's 4th grade. But they're not going to comprehend if they don't pull the print off the page. And we start early. Now, I know the kids really have fun with this, but what we're looking at is how early does the brain begin to discriminate between sounds? You know? And it's early. So, this kid, I can't remember exactly how old. You guys would know just by the look of the kid how old the kid is. But we're asking this youngster, it's a fascinating thing. We teach this little one to look one way or the other way when they hear same sounds or different sounds. And we do that when we say book, duh, and the kid looks that way just by chance. We have a lot of activity, a lot of doll activity, colors, lights, novelty. And when the sounds are the same, they look the other way. It takes a while to get that pattern set. So then the youngster is presented pairs of sounds, b or b. And, they do it pretty well after you get them to move their head the way you want to go. And you can see the system beginning to develop in the same areas of the brain that you will see activated when people read. Phonemic awareness is beginning, discriminating between sounds in phonemic awareness, but individual sounds are being recognized and contrasted at that age. A lot of kids don't ever get those kind of games and fun and stuff early on. Okay, here's the F word. It's a kind of knowledge. Which letters are used to represent which phonemes. It's a kind of skill. The 2 words on the bottom are nonsense words. I only show them because all of you can read them, and you've never probably seen them before in print. That's what a kid's job is. They look at words, it's like they've never seen it before. But can they read that? Can your good readers read that? Absolutely. Why? Because they have good phonemic awareness and good phonics. Now, you don't want to go around teaching this all the time because comprehension is the big deal. But it is a window on the facility the kid has with seeing an unknown word and decoding it to sound. And believe me, if you don't have phonemic awareness and phonics, there is no way your reading is going to be as rapid as it needs to be to comprehend. So these are just some principles that we've found over and over again. And I've already talked about, that print represents speech via the alphabet, and but that's part of phonics. Fluency you hear a lot about. You saw Austin, disfluent on steroids. Why? He couldn't decode the words. He couldn't recognize the words and bring them in quickly. Now, before he had been taught to use picture cues or the context of a sentence to predict what word that could be. You'll notice that he doesn't read well enough to even have the context, the sentence structure around it to guess. And kids were being taught to guess at words, unfamiliar words that they didn't know, on the assumption that reading was natural. If reading is natural, it's going to unfold, and if they have a little bit of time, then help them with strategies that keep them in this wonderful literature. Well, you have to keep them in wonderful literature. But guessing from context or picture cues is, oh boy, my wife will kill me. It's malpractice. Malpractice is defined as a legitimate, scientifically or evidence-based finding that is not applied in medical practice appropriately. We know, but we don't use. Now, people have fallen in love with reading as natural, and kids don't need to learn phonemic awareness and phonics. And our teachers, all doing the best they want to do, have been exposed to that at one time was maybe a great idea. Wouldn't it be great if all our kids had to do was read good literature and learn how to guess and predict? How easy would that be? That'd be pretty cool. That's the way I was taught. I said, darn, this reading instruction's going to be a blast. But the whole foundation is off. Reading it natural. Only about 2.5 to 4% of words can be predicted from surrounding context. That's it. And it takes at least 4 guesses to get to the right guess, on average. Not to mention that guessing is not a bona fide strategy, because kids don't gloss over the print. They read every word, like when they're skilled readers. You know, like you and I, we can watch your eyes as really great readers, and they scan every word. It's weird. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? But the eyes focus in milliseconds every word. So when we ask kids to gloss over the text, we're going to see some problems, because that's not the way the brain works. The brain focuses on the internal structure of the words. Once we're automatic and fluent, then they become sight words. So we have no issue. But this is a tough one to teach. There's a lot of emotion that is foiled up in these kinds of teaching approaches. And so I was a convert, to these kinds of teaching approaches. I found that I had a lot in common with a lot of teachers. We felt secure in that, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And it was the kid who was the problem, wasn't me. So here's just something stark you want to think of. 4th, 5th, 6th graders encounter about 10,000 words they've never seen before during a year's worth of reading. Each of these new words occurs only about 10 times in a year's worth of reading. It's very difficult to guess the identity of these new words from the context. Early intervention is its own. I could talk for you for weeks on this one. But, you're seeing, disaggregate the data. Here's what you're looking at. Kids in welfare families, they pick up 3 million words a year versus your kids who pick up about 11 million. On average, most 18-month-old kids learn 9 new words a day. I'm sorry, that is a day throughout the preschool years. By 3 years of age, the kid can usually speak in full sentences. Most kids from disadvantaged homes are delayed in phonemic awareness, have less exposure to print and the alphabet, have vocabulary that is 1/2 that of their more financially secure kids, families. They have a range of experience and conceptual knowledge that is often limited. And this is what it boils down to. I don't want to belabor this. The top graph just shows reading comprehension capability. The red is typical kids coming up. The bottom line and the 5.2-year difference is kids who had low oral language in kindergarten. 5.5 years. That's very replicable. Don't get discouraged. This is where people will look at this and say, oh my God, what can we do? It's too late. No. Even kids in the 5th grade respond extremely well to instructional approaches that are delivered expertly, that concentrate, if need be, on phonemic awareness or phonics or fluency or vocabulary, even at the 5th grade. All of our teachers are measuring each day as the kid is reading, what are the words correct per minute? What are the errors per minute? What % comprehension is there? So they can differentiate instruction, and they may find that phonemic awareness is not a problem at all, but fluency is. So our teachers need to learn 800 plus words a year, about 2 words per day. Children need to learn 2,000 to 3,000 new words each year from 3rd grade onward, about 6 to 8 per day. Most typically developing, somebody give me a hand. Children need to encounter a word about 12 times before they know it. As a teacher, I really could have used this information. So, this is pretty straightforward. You're not going to comprehend if you can't read the words on a page quickly. You can't comprehend if you don't have the background knowledge and the vocabulary. And you can't comprehend if you haven't been taught how to think about understanding text. You actually relate it to your own background knowledge. That's one great strategy. Can I relate to this? Is what I'm reading, have I ever wanted to do this or seen this? That kind of thing. When you and I read, we're always, spinning our mind when we read something and relating it to always to our language, but we're relating it to things we've always thought about. That's why reading is enjoyable. So, just to repeat, accurate and fluent reading skills have to be in place. Otherwise, you're going to bog down. And kids have to be reading with the conceptual ideas and background knowledge that's relevant to that text at that time. This is why teaching reading is not lockstep, do this, 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 and this, and this. It requires an expertise that can make fun, that can teach with passion and glee these different componential skills. But the object is to get there, comprehension. The bottom one can't comprehend, motivation to understand, and interest. The problem is when, as John pointed out, and as I've heard others point out, is it's predictive or predictable that kids who struggle to learn to read in the first grade lose motivation much more quickly than I ever thought. And so early is better. Can we get kids more highly motivated? Only if we teach them well. That's where you saw Austin reading 2 years later. I met Austin. He's the best reader in his class in public school. When you saw him read with difficulty, his NAEP score was definitely in the below basic range. You all can see that, right? Now he's the best reader in his class. Why? He just grew out of it? No. Kids don't grow out of reading difficulties. It doesn't happen. Wait, let's just give them time. Bullshit. Oh God, we're on camera. That really makes it worse. Never wait, because it doesn't catch up. Once you follow 34,000 kids, or a subset, 10,000 kids, for sometimes 30 years, you see who catches up. Nobody, without brilliant, correct instruction. They don't catch up on their own. So these are all the factors. This is when I was at SMU. So, if you got to copy this PowerPoint, you see that it goes beyond just phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency. There's all kind of things that have to be thought about. And teachers can begin to love this if their faculty becomes familiar with the concepts and with the research and have passion to say, how do kids learn to read? What goes wrong when they don't? How do you prevent it? What do we do about it when we have Austin? So the blueprint is going to rely on so many things, but one of them is change in higher education, is change at the teacher preparation level. You'll never get anywhere. What your state is probably going to have to do is spend millions of dollars developing coaching models that work with teachers who aren't familiar with this information, feel comfortable and learn and be motivated by watching their kids learn to read. Because I could talk all day to all the teachers in the world or all the leaders in the world and so forth and so on, but if they don't apply it quickly, we're nowhere. They have to see it work. So, coaching. And the coaches have to be you don't select a coach on the basis of just their skill. Coaches have to be warm. They have to have relational skills. They have to be able to support the teachers they're working with. They have to develop relationships. The teachers have to know that they're supported. In some schools in Mississippi, if not most, the idea was to bring a coach in, but to work with the principal, so the principal understood first. And then the principal introduces the coach to the teachers. Cultural change flows upward, meaning if your leaders aren't leading, and you'll understand this clearly, people check you out. Well, he's got or she's got the language, but when these different teaching resources come in, we put them in the closet and we say we're doing it. Believe me, I've seen that in so many states. We're already doing this. And it's no surprise that their scores don't change. But doing this takes time, enormous amounts of time. Mississippi, it took 6 years to watch a state rise to the top of the nation in reading gains. Mississippi, they were the lowest in the country. Now, quite a few of those, they're, I guess, right at the average range of the country. 6 years, that's how long it takes. So patience, the realization that you have to work together, the idea that, look, this is not easy. If you're working with higher education, if you're building coaching models, if you're working with parents, if you're working with principals and leadership at all levels, all have to have the same language, or they're not going to be able to understand one another. Common language. That's where I started off. So, it's a big job. If you ask what are the priorities in terms of trying to get to it, leadership. Leadership has to have the confidence in the data. Leadership has to, leaders are working with belief systems, maybe even their own. And the sensitivity and the language they use and the presentations that they bring forth that aren't threatening, that are inclusive, that take people from where they are, is non-negotiable. It's leadership, I'm not going to say is everything, but we'll never get this tough stuff done without vision at the leadership level. Beside a teacher, a principal has the second largest impact on a kid's academic success. They have to have a common language. They have to be able to work with their teachers. But so does the superintendent. Superintendent would be great. They check in and watch a kid read. They see Austin, come back 2 years later and see Austin. At the highest levels, governor on down. Now, you can't put all this information out for people who are extraordinarily busy and expect people to say, hey, watching a kid, how's his phonemic awareness? But that's the name of the game. So I'm going to leave you there. And I hope I've made sense about what it takes to learn to read, why the kids are struggling, how do you prevent it, and what you do about it once they come into you at first, second, third, fourth grades. It's based upon, I have to say, really good science. And why do I say it's good? It's replicated over and over again. If we can't replicate a study, we chuck it. It's just the nature of the game. If we have an idea, we test it. And we test it, just let me mention, using the appropriate research designs. You know how we dichotomize phonics and whole language? We also dichotomize qualitative versus quantitative research. People get medieval on each other. The thing is, the design is simply the tool that you would use that bears on the question you're asking. Research designs are selected based upon your question. If you want to know what the classroom climate is, if you want to know how teachers are responding to new curriculum, so qualitative research has to be done. You have to be able to live with people. You have to watch human interactions. You have to record that. You have to test it. Qualitative designs, case studies, ethnographies. Have to have it. If you want to ask what works, you have to say, I've got to pick a quantitative design because there's no way I can tell if A is better than B unless I test it. Because if A is supposed to cause B, there's all kind of stuff that comes between A and B that could also influence B or cause B. Those are called confounds, nuisance variables. So what do? We randomly assign kids in schools and stuff like that to get those intervening, those nuisance variables spread out so they're not clogging up our interpretations. Am I making sense? So dichotomies don't work in human thinking. I mean, they're used, but they don't get you where you want to go. World comes to us a bit more variable and complex. But all of this can be learned. It takes time. It takes leadership. It takes the guide, the leadership from somebody like Cindy and somebody like Dr. Johnson and somebody like Janine and somebody sitting in every one of these chairs. It starts with us. It starts with you. We can do this. I've seen it done. It takes a long time. We have the leadership in the room that can do this. We have the teaching brilliance inside the room that can do this. So, welcome to complexity.
Thank you so much, Dr.
I had a conversation with one of the deans of School of Ed in Kansas, and he wanted me to discount the success of Mississippi because part of their program retained third graders who were not reading proficiently. And so he said the data of the fourth graders getting that much better as a state, that Kansas would look a lot better if we dropped the bottom 10% of our population. And what I've read, though, I'm overwhelmed with how good I think Mississippi did it.
Yeah.
But does that matter? Does it, why do the academics get so upset over the data and it being accurate to the point that we lose the point of?
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at the Mississippi data, you can see multiple years as the curves began to come up. I look at the third grade retention as a tough decision to make, but it's also a decision predicated on the fact that if they're going into content-laden fourth grade, reading below basic, what's the purpose? That's kind of stupid, if you ask me. Isn't it? So you can statistically look at that and it doesn't hold any water, There's also other samples in Mississippi that weren't retained that show good growth. So, I think it's a great question. I really do. I think to point that out is really good, but I don't agree with the interpretation from a data perspective. I do agree with the policy. And it's only because if you work with all these children and you send them to the fourth grade at below basic or even below proficient sometime, they're going to, again, emotionally, spiritually, they're going to suffer more. I mean, you get into those age ranges, then you're really looking at peer pressure.
Become aware of how passionate and committed they are to the work that they're doing and trying to make sure that teachers in free service programs are truly prepared. What might be one or two nuggets of wisdom that you would share for them to consider as they think about how to evolve?
Yeah. There's a couple of resources. In fact, Diane and I listened. She actually found it. It's on the, yeah, it's available on the PowerPoint. But Stephanie Stoller, who is at St. Joseph's University, teacher for many years, became, I think, had her epiphany when she continued to fail to teach kids to read and began to see that that may be related to what she was taught about reading. Stephanie then went back to graduate school and went through her master's and doctoral degrees. Now, she will tell you very clearly that she did not learn much at all in those degree programs. I'm sorry to say. So she went and found resources that could help her. In Mississippi, there are centers similar to this one. I'm not saying everybody should go to a center or whatever, but to begin to acquire the information so that they're comfortable with it, not to be overwhelmed with it, but to be comfortable with possibly another way of looking at things. And she did. Now, she's developed a core of people, academic faculty, teaching and education and teaching reading, who she discusses with why they were poor teachers when they were in the classroom, and how difficult it is to teach in a college of education where you're presenting what the science says with other professors presenting invalid information. Think of what the students are going through. Holy mackerel. This person says reading is natural and cueing systems are the best thing going. I come into this lady's class and she's talking about direct systematic instruction of intentionally very clear capabilities. Faculty will have to, I think, be comfortable with faculty. You've got to remember the belief systems that bring us all to our point of view. They're painful to maybe give up. And I think it's going to be a gradual process. You know, I hate to say this, but and it's kind of on your plate. That but there has to be monitoring involved. There has to be accountability. Again, you don't want malpractice. And remember, faculty and teachers can blend this information with all of the good things that come from their theoretical point of view. You know, you don't throw something out and pick up this. It's not an either or. But you got to make clear intentionally what your students need to know. That's pre-service students, graduate students, that's little kids. So it's not either or. It's not your responsibility that you have these kinds of ideas. I mean, in other words, you were taught that way. You know, I just look at myself, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't even know how to question it till I put my scientific hat on, and then, you know, okay, I didn't do well for a lot of these kids, but I can, you know, I can bite the bullet. You know, people are okay with being wrong over time. People are not okay with being told they're wrong. Nobody's wrong in this case. We evolve.
Increasingly distressed over
the years, and particularly when I look at this data, the disaggregated data about my little brothers and sisters and all kids of color and low-income kids that tend to fall farther and farther behind.
Yes.
And our public schools are becoming more kids of color. And I'm wondering, in your practice, in your work, what have you done or discovered or watched or advised on how to help that gap close and keep from getting larger?
Right. Great question. When we developed the early intervention research from birth onward, what we discovered, and usually you're kind of naive going into this, we saw that in Head Start, for example, there was again a dichotomy between social emotional development versus cognitive interactions. The belief systems were strong. People worried that if you were too cognitive or too academic, you would turn kids off. The job of preschool was to really shower kids with love, help their self-concepts, make sure they're not hungry, provide them clothes whenever you need to, but stay away from the kinds of early language interactions that could begin to bring them into school ready to go with the language foundation they need. And that dichotomy, like all dichotomies, pits people against each other. Phonics, whole language. Cognitive versus social emotional. I can't believe how we shoot ourselves in the foot. So our research showed clearly that youngsters, no matter, socioeconomic status stuff goes across every race, every ethnicity. And socioeconomic, status really undergirds a lot of what you're seeing in early childhood and as they enter first grade. When you disaggregate, you can see the lack of equity. And the reason, again, many reasons, but they don't have the language base. You heard me mention the disparity in vocabulary usage. Not the parents' fault. Sometimes they are working 2-3 jobs. They may not have enough funds to populate the house with books. They may not understand themselves what are the kinds of interactions at home that build language and the kind of precognitive abilities. So our research helped parents learn how to do that. Our research also worked with kids in research settings, which aren't normal. But kids who acquired vocabulary and began to understand the gymnastics of language did fine. It's not inherent in any of these children that they're going to hit the wall. What's predictable if they don't have foundational skills, particularly language skills, vocabulary, playing with words, rhyming, like we did. How many of you rhymed with your kids? Yeah, you probably didn't know you were asking a kid to slice off a sound or a letter that they couldn't hear the sound. But you see how that kind of practice, how something that fun can help build reading-related language. So can it be done? Absolutely. Good instruction doesn't respect socioeconomic status either. So, if I hadn't been around so long, and if I hadn't looked at all these kids of every age and of every ethnicity, and, I may sound like I know a lot of stuff. In research, you never know a lot of stuff. For example, the brain I was showing you. We don't know a lick about the brain, let me tell you. It's very, I won't go into it. But if you ever want to feel stupid, study the brain. So I hope that helps. It's all in the intentional attention to interactions that build language confidence.
With the research, the brain research it talks about, and all of the information you gave us today, we're hearing a lot about students need the language before they can apply their reading skills,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So I'm curious what your findings are, what work you may have done with English learners, because they come in and they have a foundation. They are able to differentiate sounds, but in their language, not
Right.
necessarily in English.
Right. Well, offline, let me give you, now this is an interesting story. At the NIH, I was in my office, and I got a call. Somebody said, you got a call. So I picked up my phone, and this voice said, Dr. Lyon, I got a lot of kids down here can't read. And I really need to know why that is, and I need to know what to do about it. And that was George W. Bush. I didn't do well by his accent. Hey, can you come down here? So I went down to Texas and took him through a lot of this. Very attentive. He listened to it all. He had a staff there. He said, are we doing this? Do these people feel comfortable with this? You know, people say President Bush may have had these kind of foibles. All of us do. Was he a smart man? Brilliant. He asked the best questions of me than most people asked. He wasn't encumbered with, extraneous stuff. How did that child do that? What do my teachers need to know? What do my colleges of education need to know? So, on the way out of his office, he said, this is all well and good, but how about my kids whose second language is English? What are you going to do about that? So I got back to NIH, and the next day I talked with the director, and I made the case for a program just like you see with English-speaking kids, strong longitudinal research and so forth, with kids whose English is second to their, in this case, Spanish. And I don't know if you know Elsa Hagen or people like that, but there's all kind of people still at those sites that have, done extremely well with the question you asked. Point being, NIH spent millions and still spends millions on trying to figure your question out. And, offline, I'll give you the resources.
I'm not sure how this might be taken by the room, but one question I have is, I think we have really great team leaders here to get moving on this, but we have one other player that is not playing well sometimes, and that is the textbook industry.
Yes.
And how can we solve that problem?
Know the research. I mean, I can't believe how many of these vendors talk about the science of reading. They all have it. The only thing that will begin to reduce that in terms of false claims and so forth is for us to have the knowledge. And whoever's adopting and whoever's listening to them asks good questions. Yeah, we've all, money is can't get rid of it, hopefully. And business is a competitive sport, and people want to do well. I think there's a lot of the publishing companies that really have big hearts. I do. A lot of them would come to NIH, and I would explain to them, these are the kinds of things you have to consider, and I would also offer to do clinical trials on their product. Very few. Linda Mood Bell, yes, those kinds of things.
So we control that, though. right? I mean, we're spending that money.
Yes.
Is that something we should talk about clinical trials, right? You wouldn't just put drugs out there. You wouldn't.
No. No. I think.
How should we think about it?
Well, great question. I mean, clinical trials are very expensive. So, I think in education, well, right. I think the first step is we know what reading is. It's going to be hard to talk with, the representative from Houghton Mifflin if we can't say, okay, show me how you present or represent the phonological side of things. How have you integrated that with phonics? All these skills that you hear me say, they're all integrated. They're all reinforced. It's not, when you're teaching a kid to read a word, you ask the kid at the same time to give you other words that mean the same thing. You move from print to language. Good teachers do that. So it's a great question. You're spending an awful lot of money on textbooks and other commercial programs. And if you want to save money, you have to educate those who are buying the product so that they can ask the right questions. I would say, have you done any randomized trials? That'd be the first question out of my mouth. Yeah, you got to hold people's feet to the fire. You do. State boards of education, sometimes they've got some weights on their feet. It's okay, but, we've got to move forward together.
Yeah, and this kind of also feels like a national issue because you've got Texas, New York, Florida, California. I mean, that's where the big one is, but it feels like this is a kind of a national point.
Yeah.
On this outcome where we can charge up a lot of hills, but it's a lot easier when the big guys are there with us, right? I mean,
okay, one more thing. All right. You're looking at a youngster coming into the first grade who's at risk for reading failure. And what we're measuring, this is Jack Fletcher's work and myself and Andy Papanicolaou. If you'll notice the left hemisphere, top left, and just number one, contrast it with bottom left. You see the red and the size of the activation compared to bottom left. Everybody see that? Okay. The at-risk reader has a very difficult time with language, particularly the linguistic gymnastics with rhyming and so forth and so on. The not-at-risk reader, these are matched for socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, and so forth. So this up here would be Austin, who you saw. This down here is a good, vibrant reader, or Austin today. And you can see the typical signature that we see is that there's overactivation in the right hemisphere, which right hemisphere wasn't built to tear apart sounds and work with language. But the reader is really trying to compensate. And you'll see the difference between top and bottom right with the typical reader coming along and very little activation on the right. All right, now you got to stay with me here. Top left of the slide. Yeah. Notice on the left-hand side, that's the right hemisphere, notice the activation signature. You see it? Notice, all right, right hemisphere, yep. Notice bottom, that's the left hemisphere, And that's the home for language and reading and stuff like that. You see how diminished it is? It's like that first at-risk kids. These are kids older. But the point I want to make is difficulties learning to read have much less activation in the left hemisphere than the normal kids do. After intervention with structured literacy, notice the change. Before, after, a diminishing right hemisphere signature, which we want to see. Before left hemisphere, minimal signature. Below, increased activity in the left hemisphere. Make sense? And it's very predictable. We've imaged, quite a few kids. And so, your brain surgeons. Yeah. And so we can do this. I promise you we can do this.
I think we even are more confident that we have you and our court.